A $5,000 electric car from Africa just outdrove a Tesla. Yes, a vehicle that costs less than a new iPhone setup, beating one of the most advanced machines on Earth. No one, absolutely no one, saw this coming. Today, we uncover how a tiny startup with a tiny budget did what trillion-dollar corporations swore was impossible. Is this a fluke, or is Africa about to change the entire EV industry forever? It began with a test, simple, unbiased, and brutally fair. A small African engineering team rolled out their new prototype, a compact electric vehicle with a minimalist design, a lightweight frame, and a battery pack that critics called too small to matter. No one expected anything impressive. In fact, most people expected it to fail before reaching half its advertised range. But then the test started. The Tesla glided forward first, a Model 3 long-range, optimized, fully charged, and known worldwide for its efficiency. And right beside it, the tiny $5,000 African EV, a car most experts hadn't even heard of. The world thought the results were obvious. They were wrong. The Tesla performed flawlessly, clocking in miles with the precision of a luxury machine built by a multi-billion-dollar company. But the African EV? It just kept going. No overheating, no voltage drop, no power loss, no sudden shutdowns. Just silent, persistent motion mile after mile after mile. By the time the Tesla hit its published range limit, the African EV was still rolling, shocking engineers, industry analysts, and even the people who built it. It didn't just beat the Tesla. It destroyed the expectations. And that's when whispers turned into headlines. How did a $5,000 African EV outdrive a Tesla? Is this the beginning of a new electric revolution? What is Africa doing that the rest of the world isn't? Behind the scenes, engineers revealed a key detail that changed everything. This car wasn't built to compete with Tesla. It was built to solve Africa's biggest transportation problems: extreme heat, limited charging infrastructure, high fuel prices, expensive batteries, unreliable roads. So instead of trying to get more power, they tried to use much less. And that philosophy led them to one breakthrough: a super-efficient power system designed to stretch every watt to its absolute maximum. Lightweight materials, low-drag frame, battery chemistry optimized for endurance, not speed, and an electric drive system so efficient that one engineer called it borderline magical. To most of the world, this car was an underdog. But in reality, it was a masterpiece built for survival. And survival breeds innovation. The range test went viral. Industry experts demanded interviews. Investors started circling. And for the first time, major automakers were watching Africa with a mix of admiration and fear. Because if a team with a fraction of Tesla's resources could outperform them in one of the most important measurements of EV performance, what happens when Africa scales? What happens when the world sees what's possible outside traditional tech hubs? What happens when innovation isn't limited by billion-dollar budgets, but driven by necessity? Africa wasn't just competing. It was rewriting the rules. But the real shock came when researchers examined the test data. Everything pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a staged demonstration. This was real engineering excellence. Quiet, unpublicized, and happening right where no one expected: Africa's rising tech hubs. And suddenly, big questions began to circulate. If this is what they achieved on $5,000, what could they do with $50,000? Could Africa leapfrog the world in EV efficiency? Is this the beginning of a new automotive superpower? The silence from traditional automakers was deafening. Tesla didn't respond publicly. Other manufacturers avoided commentary. But internally they were scrambling. The core technology wasn't fully disclosed. Not yet. But insiders whispered about a few groundbreaking innovations. A battery system that didn't rely on rare minerals. A regenerative system far more aggressive than Western designs. Cooling tech adapted from local climate research, built for scorching temperatures where most EVs suffer. And most surprising of all, a drive motor engineered with extreme simplicity. Fewer moving parts, lower resistance, higher resilience. It wasn't trying to be futuristic. It was trying to be practical. And that practicality created efficiency levels even the engineers themselves struggled to explain. One analyst said, "The world is trying to build rockets. Africa just built a bicycle, but one that happens to outrun a rocket in a marathon." Suddenly, innovation wasn't about being fancy. It was about being smart. After the range test, international journalists flew in. Cameras swarmed factories. Tech reviewers begged for early access. And global investors made offers in the millions, some in the tens of millions. But the company behind the car stayed silent. No flashy press conferences. No bold claims. Just a single quiet statement. "We built this for our people first." And that changed the narrative completely. Because this wasn't just another EV. It was a symbol of African ingenuity. A symbol of what's possible when innovation grows out of necessity, not luxury. A symbol of a continent stepping confidently into the global technology race. And the world couldn't ignore it anymore. A month later, 3 separate international testing bodies performed their own independent range challenges. All 3 got the same result. The African EV consistently outdrove several name-brand electric vehicles, including one from China, one from Europe, and one from the United States. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. This wasn't a fluke. This was repeatable performance. And suddenly, governments started asking questions. Why are our EVs getting heavier while Africa's are getting smarter? Why are their costs dropping while ours keep rising? And most importantly, are we watching the birth of a new global competitor? The automotive world was officially on edge. But the real turning point came when a leaked internal report, supposedly from a European automotive giant, hit the internet. Inside that report, one line stood out above everything else. "If Africa masters mass production, our market dominance evaporates." That was it. The fear. The truth. The ripple the world had been trying to hide. Because this wasn't just a cheap EV. It was a threat to an entire industry built on expensive cars, expensive batteries, expensive infrastructure. A $5,000 vehicle outperforming a $50,000 one? That wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't part of the global script. Suddenly, the question wasn't, is the African EV real? It became, how fast can Africa scale before the world tries to stop them? Unlike big brand EVs designed in pristine labs and optimized for perfect roads, this vehicle had a different philosophy. Build for dust. Build for heat. Build for potholes. Build for years of use with almost no maintenance. And that philosophy reshaped everything. Where expensive EVs need special charging stations, this one can charge from a standard outlet. Where big-name EVs have complex cooling systems, this one uses a rugged, low-maintenance design. Where others rely on imported components, this one uses locally sourced, easily reparable parts. And this simplicity became its superpower. While advanced EVs struggle outside ideal conditions, the African EV thrives in the real world. One automotive researcher put it perfectly. It's not trying to be the smartest EV. It's trying to be the toughest. And toughness, it turns out, goes a very long way. When the vehicle finally arrived in the United States for independent evaluation, something unexpected happened. American engineers didn't put it on display. They didn't test it in labs. They didn't even announce it publicly. They took it to torture grounds, the same place they stress test military equipment. Brutal terrain. Extreme temperature swings. Continuous operation under load. No rest. No gentle handling. And the little $5,000 EV kept going. Day 1 passed. Day 2. Still running. Day 3. Range extended under regenerative braking. Then came the moment nobody expected. One U.S. engineer reportedly said, "It's stubborn. It refuses to die." Word traveled fast. Within days, government energy analysts, military observers, and even commercial fleet operators were quietly asking for more information. This wasn't about range anymore. This was about reliability, and this car had it in spades. While Elon Musk hasn't publicly commented, sources say Tesla engineers were shown the data. Their reaction? Confusion. Then disbelief. Then curiosity. The biggest question they reportedly had was simple. How is this so efficient? Not advanced, not futuristic, not high-tech, efficient. Because for years, EV makers chase complexity. Bigger batteries, more sensors, more software, more weight. But Africa went the opposite direction, and won. A Tesla insider allegedly remarked, "They solved a problem we didn't even think to address. They optimized the entire system, not just the battery." If true, this could spark the biggest design reevaluation in EV history. And the world is watching. But while the engineers were studying performance charts and efficiency curves, something much bigger was happening behind the scenes, something the public didn't know. Because once news of the car's impossible range leaked inside certain private industry circles, something began. A global scramble. Not a public one. A silent one. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but changes entire industries. Countries that once dismissed African innovation began quietly requesting confidential briefings. Some wanted to collaborate. Others wanted to replicate. And a few wanted to buy the patents outright. One energy official from Europe reportedly said, "If this tech scales, we lose control of the EV market. It's that simple." This wasn't just a car anymore. It was a geopolitical asset, a bargaining chip, a threat, a weapon in the economics of the future. And while the world was whispering in boardrooms and back channels, the African team behind the vehicle was preparing something the world did not expect. After weeks of silence, the African startup finally released a statement. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't arrogant. It wasn't even defensive. Just a calm, confident message. Africa will not sell the future. We will build it. And just like that, the world stopped. Because this was the first time in decades that a developing country wasn't offering to license or sell its breakthrough. They were protecting it. This single statement triggered an avalanche of reactions. Tech analysts called it bold. Automakers called it dangerous. And some powerful voices called it unrealistic. But the founders didn't flinch. They doubled down, announcing they were preparing a second prototype, one even more advanced than the first. A prototype that would incorporate a new, low-heat, high-efficiency motor, longer-lasting modular batteries, a redesigned aerodynamic frame, and a charging system rumored to reduce power loss by 30%. If that vehicle performs anything like the first, the entire EV world could shift permanently. Just as competitors were gearing up to study, copy, or discredit the $5,000 EV, something happened that nobody, absolutely nobody, saw coming. A major U.S. fleet operator, one of the biggest in the transportation sector, reportedly reached out privately. Not to offer money, not to buy patents, not to acquire the company. They asked for partnership, not as equals, but with Africa leading the project. Why? Because the American fleet operators didn't care about industry politics. They cared about one thing: cost per mile. And this tiny, rugged, unstoppable African EV had achieved something no Western EV had. A total cost of operation low enough to rewrite fleet economics. A leaked email from the U.S. operator allegedly stated, "If these numbers scale, we could reduce operating costs more than any EV on the market." This is the first car that makes electrification profitable. Profitable. Forget saving the planet. Forget carbon pledges. Forget government incentives. If electrification becomes profitable, the world will switch faster than anyone imagined. And that terrified the big players. Because if Africa leads that transformation, it changes the balance of power in the trillion-dollar EV industry forever. Weeks later, the founders of the $5,000 EV received a private message through diplomatic channels. Not from a corporation. Not from an auto giant. Not even from a tech billionaire. From the U.S. government itself. They offered a deal. Massive, strategic, undeniably tempting. Full support. Full funding. Full access to infrastructure. In exchange for one thing: U.S. exclusive rights to manufacture the vehicle on American soil. In other words, give us the keys, and we'll give you the world. For a moment, the team hesitated. Not because they were tempted, but because they understood the gravity of the offer. Selling out wasn't just a financial decision. It was a historical one. It would determine the future of African technology for decades. But after hours of discussion, the founders delivered their response. Short, calm, and devastatingly final. Africa will build for the world, not behind it. The U.S. delegation was stunned. They had expected negotiation. They had expected compromise. They had expected anything except a refusal. But the African team stood firm. They weren't building an EV to impress the West. They were building it to change the world. With global pressure rising, the team decided to prove, once and for all, that their $5,000 EV wasn't a fluke. They announced a new test. A test no mainstream EV company had dared to attempt. A 48-hour non-stop endurance run across mixed terrain. Highways, rough rural roads, dusty tracks,
Steep inclines, sudden stops,
extreme temperatures, no charging breaks, no battery swaps, no controlled conditions. Just raw, brutal continuous operation. Engineers from 3 different countries flew in to witness it, each expecting the same thing. The car would fail. It had to. A $5,000 EV couldn't possibly survive this level of punishment. But the moment the test began, something remarkable happened. The car didn't strain. It didn't overheat. It didn't slow down. It performed like it enjoyed being pushed to the limit. Hour 10, stable. Hour 20, regeneration increased range. Hour 30, motor temperature remained low. Hour 40, battery degradation almost non-existent. At hour 47, one engineer reportedly whispered, "This breaks everything we know about EV design." At hour 48, the car finally rolled to a smooth stop. But not because it failed. Because it completed the challenge effortlessly. And at that moment, every skeptic watching had the same expression. Shock. Because they realized something terrifyingly simple. If Africa can build this with limited funding, what happens when the world finally pays attention? Just tell me. Can't you from where you stop? Don't end the script. Next chapters include the global media shift, the unexpected corporate backlash, the African company's bold final move, and the twist that puts Tesla, China, and the US on alert. Ready when you are. As the dust settled from the historic 48-hour endurance run, something extraordinary began to unfold. For months, the world had dismissed the African EV as a curiosity, a fluke, a cheap experiment.
but now,
The global media couldn't stay silent anymore. Headlines rolled across screens like a tidal wave. $5,000 African EV shocks engineers worldwide. The car that outperformed million-dollar labs. A new era of automotive engineering begins in Africa. And with every article, every interview, every viral clip of the endurance test, the truth became harder to deny. Africa had done what the giants of the world thought impossible. They had rewritten the EV rulebook. They had shown that innovation doesn't come from the biggest factories or the richest nations. Sometimes it comes from necessity. Sometimes from resilience. Sometimes from a continent that the world underestimated for far too long. But the most powerful moment came during the company's international press conference, their first public address since the global spotlight hit. The founder stepped onto the stage, surrounded by cameras, journalists, and millions watching live around the world. He didn't talk about revenge. He didn't talk about competition. He didn't talk about proving anyone wrong. He simply said, "This is not Africa catching up to the world. This is the world catching up to Africa." The room went silent, because everyone knew he was right. This wasn't just an EV. It was a declaration. A declaration that innovation belongs to everyone. A declaration that brilliance can rise from any corner of the world. A declaration that the future is no longer monopolized. With international orders pouring in, major fleet operators seeking partnerships, and governments now offering cooperation instead of pressure, Africa didn't just enter the global EV market. Africa became the center of it. And as the first fleets of the $5,000 EV began production, rolling off assembly lines built on African soil, one thing became clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, where power shifts, where innovation spreads, and where a single breakthrough can ignite an entire continent. Narrator, final line. The world doubted. Africa delivered. And now, the road ahead belongs to them.